Okay, so on the show today, Vincent Yong. So Vincent's from Singapore. He's a therapist. He's an author. A lot of interesting stuff on his website. I think he wears one of those people that wears, many different hats. So I look forward to talking to him about movement, about dance, about somatics. One of the nice things about running the conference is I get to meet cool, interesting people from around the world. So joining us from Singapore today, right, Vincent?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Vincent, and happy to be chatting with you guys. Through Mark himself.
Welcome, welcome. So how did you get interested in the body, Vincent? Well, tell us about your journey.
Well, at the age of 3 months, the doctor said to my mom that we discovered something about your child. He's not like every other kid. So then they found out about this ventricular septal defect, which is basically a hole in the heart.
Okay.
So the septal actually divides the heart into two chambers, right? And if you have the good blood and the bad blood mixing, that's not a good thing. So of course, back then, this was like 40 years ago, right? And everyone is like, oh my God, and what are we gonna do? And the doctor is saying that, if you don't do something about it, your kid's gonna die. And of course, when my mom hears the word die, it's like not a good thing. And I believe any mothers and parents out there, if you hear this kind of words, being laid upon your kid, it is like trauma.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and of course, right up to the age of 7, 8, when they said, hey, I really think that this is a good time for you to go for that operation now, because if your heart keep working out, very strenuously, you're not going to live past the age of 16. And it's interesting that during my whole process of growing up, I have always been moving. Of course, my mom thinks that, this is the kind of kid, and being Asian, right? We are always smack silly to be quiet. It's like, don't move, don't do anything, and just sit still. If I talk, you listen. And that whole process of keeping quiet does not stay very well with me because it was survival.
Uh-huh.
I had to move to regulate my breathing and all that. And of course, especially when you're climbing flights of stairs, and those are really necessary because working out cardiovascularly versus dancing, quote unquote. And of course, I didn't know what dancing was. I was just a kid, right, moving around, but in a special rhythm that was suitable for my heart and me to connect and say, okay, now you can breathe. And now this is where you take that turn and this is what you do, and it was very innate and very intrinsic. It is intuitive. But fast forward to today and having done all the trainings and all that, going through the whole science about the physiology,
What's the training?
and of course,
Some schools of dance. Tell us a little bit about the training.
so the whole training from, well, I started as an engineer actually, and then I quit engineering because I was participating in dance way too often, being in the dance studio as opposed to in the lecture theater and tutorials. And then I said, I got to do something about this. And I won this competition when I had the dance. And of course, I have to say that this competition almost killed me because it was like 6 minutes nonstop, full on dancing. But we came in, our group came in second, and that was it. I realized I got to do professional dancing, and that brought me to going to the local schools and eventually ended up in the Netherlands, and dancing with amazing people who are now in renowned companies like NDT, whole fashion, all that. So yeah, and I find that it was through dance that I discovered more about myself, my personality, my brain, my body, and how it brought this whole artistic side of me, out. It's like it's pulling, dance is pulling this whole artistic part out of me. And interestingly, I was understanding the science on an intuitive level, right? And then from the dance part, I went into the Laban Movement Analysis, and from Laban Movement Analysis, going into the NLP training, going from NLP training and finding that there is some gaps in certain things. And I said, I got to go deeper. And of course, from Netherlands, coming back to Singapore, lecturing in the dance community, as well as in the colleges, writing programs. And then eventually I said, after my mom passed on, and I said, I need to do something for me, because I was dealing with a big part of her that was missing in my life. And I felt like, what can I do now? And I left Singapore and I went to New York, and I had amazing teachers, teachers such as Martha Eddy, that is also on this platform,
Great, great. Love my.
and yeah, and it's just so amazing, and from meeting Martha Eddy, to meeting other teachers and being in the Laban Institute, and, just so amazing to actually be a part of that community. And when I was training with Martha, and she was saying, hey, there's this part of the work which I kind of like, can I put it in my book? And I said, by all means. I mean, this is like one of the top people in somatic work, especially when it comes to dance. I said, well, you can do whatever. And yeah, I really want to give a lot of credit to the people who has my teachers, my predecessors that have come into my life and changed the way I think about movement as well. Giving me a framework. Laban is like a whole lexicon that actually allows you to name movement and understand the simplicity as well as the nuance. You know, um,
I remember when
Applications
I
of movement.
discovered
Yeah.
Laban for the first time, and I was like, I was almost like angry. I was like, oh my God, this bastard's discovered everything, like it was like discovering like the Newton of dance, it was
Hmm.
like, like Newton, like Newton didn't invent gravity, but he laid down the laws. You know what I mean? It was like that. It was like, this is like the Isaac Newton of dance. And then someone like Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who trained with, one of Martha Eddy's main teachers and collaborators, more like the Einstein of dance, the relativity
Yes.
theory. But that Laban basis is so outside of dance. Like most martial artists, most people don't know what it is, and it's
Yeah.
such a shame because it's just a beautiful system, right?
Yes, it's beautiful. And, coming back to Singapore and also getting myself connected with this Aikido community, right?
Oh,
And I
cool.
realized also one thing that is, I mean, whether it's Aikido, Taekwondo, anything, you name it, like what you've just said, they don't understand the system. They're just going, using their brute force and moving, in such a way where it looks really scary. And then I'm like, do you want to kill yourself or do you actually want to learn the art? That's the major question, because martial versus art and versus dance, it's like, to me, they're all the same thing because it all ties back to body and movement.
Mm-hmm.
And all these people who are, getting a knee pain or back pain saying that, oh, it's old age. I'm like, nonsense. It's the way you practice.
Yeah,
It's
there's people who don't have that, who do Tai Chi their whole life or dance their whole life. You do see those people who are sustainable and the people who aren't. And I don't know about you, but I can feel the difference now. If I'm in an Aikido club or a Systema club and they're yanking me around and there's shock to the body and tension in the body, I go, this is destroying me. Whereas
Yep.
if it's relaxed and fluid and there's breath
Yes.
and there's flow and
Yes.
I'm like, and listening and sensitivity, I'm like, oh, this is invigorating me. And I'm
Mhm.
41 now, Vincent. I don't know how old
Oh
you are.
my God, really?
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm looking, look at this belly. I'm looking at, how old are you, man? How old are you? Like,
I'm a year younger. I
yeah,
was
yeah,
born
right.
1980. Yes.
Great. So when you get to 40, there's definitely this sense of like, I don't, I'm still healthy, but I'm not like when I was 18. I was invincible. I was made of rubber. I just
Yeah.
bounced around the Aikido dojo.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's like, no, I feel it the next day if I don't train in the
Mm, mm,
life
mm,
sustaining way. You know what I mean?
mm. I have to say this, brother. You're doing such an amazing job pulling all the different people coming together to make this work in not just for the dance community, but in fact every other community that is living out there, moving and breathing. This movement or art form. And I find that without this is really a shame because a lot more people should actually have access to this. And the problem is they're talking about bodies, but they're not so embodied, right?
Right.
And this is the funny thing. It's like they want to learn, I don't know, Tai Chi. That's this 18 styles and strokes and 36 and whatnots, 108. They're just learning steps and steps and steps, but they're not understanding that these steps are not just steps. They are actually something that ties in with your emotions, that ties in with your brain, ties in with everything else, the environment. That is pulling itself together to crystallize into something that gives you youth. And a lot of people, if you go back into the Eastern culture of how the Taoists, are trained, right? And this whole process of finding that youth is not just about learning steps, it's about aligning, your mind, your body, and your soul. And the thing is, it's not so much explained right now in the world. It's just very divisive rather than integrative. You have the hospital
Mm-hmm.
doing things like neuroscience and you have physiology department. I think it's great to have the different departments. But however, when it comes to functioning, our body don't function in parts. It functions as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to have that integration. If you have the different people coming together to speak about the process of movement and what constitute movement, what creates movement, what is our intention when this thing happened, and all those in betweens, this thing is going to change the face of how we practice. And life is all about practice, isn't it? In Mandarin, we have a saying, 活到老学到老, which means as you grow older, you continue your lifelong learning. And
Mm.
if you don't have that, that means you get lost in touch. You may have information and knowledge from before, but because you are not practicing, you kind of lose it, right? And people say we are out of touch, And I find then get in touch. Get in touch. You got to do it. And it's not how well you do it, but it's how you consistently and constantly approach that thing that actually makes you better, whether you're making ramen, right? Or maybe you're just dancing. And it's the same thing,
I
and I
like
find
that.
this is, yeah.
Listen.
So
I'm curious about the cultural piece. So before we pressed record, I was saying, hey, it's really cool. The speakers from Singapore. We deliberately reached out. We tried to get more Asian speakers. We were like, hey, let's make this global. We didn't just want it to be the normal, 5 Americans and 1 Brit. And I'm also, you've mentioned a couple of comments there about the kind of the stereotype maybe of like a Far East Asian education of all the kids sitting down in rows doing what they're told. And then I'm also curious of like, how does embodiment land in a context where there is a tradition of body mind arts? So, I was teaching in Hong Kong and someone took me aside and they said, Mark, we've been doing this a while. Like it's not new what you're teaching. It's just a new package. And I was like, yeah, cool. Like a lot of my stuff comes from Aikido, right? So I know it's Japanese, not Singapore, but it's like there's these traditions. But on the other hand, sometimes it's not that embodied. Sometimes it's
mm,
not, it's got a different flavor to it or a different, it can come with a lot of other cultural stuff. So yeah, maybe you could talk about some of these themes a little bit.
I mean, from what I'm seeing here, as in Singapore, Singapore is a place where, we all speak in English, yes, because of the colonial days, right? However, having a huge percentage of Asians, right, and also Chinese, we have a lot of these values that are passed down from our grandpas, and grandpas, they are from China and all that. I find that Singapore is a mix, of the East and West. However, we don't exactly have the East, neither do we exactly have the West.
Right, I
We
found that there.
adapted. We
Yeah. What
yeah
is?
we adapted and we adopted.
Mm-hmm.
So first, of course, we adopted certain practices, because it works, so we can't fail. And therefore, if this thing doesn't fail, okay, this is good. We're going to use it. And then as we grow along, Singapore is in its 50 plus years. And I find that it is interesting to observe that certain things have been adapted. However, based on the level of creation, we are getting there. But I would say because we are still very young as a nation, so a lot of things are still very conservative in nature. So how do we then convert the new science and the traditional science, right? Is that people tend to err on, traditions. And I guess this is where familiarity, comfort, stepping out and all that plays a big part. Because if you're not willing to step out of your comfort zone, it's very hard for you to experience the new stuff. So like what you have experienced, right? If someone is to tell you that, hey, we've done this for the longest time, well, doing this for the longest time in this way that land you where you are would tell you naturally that you got to change, isn't it? However, change, I mean, my God, if you talk about change management itself is a huge topic already. And is that most of the time, it's not just mindset. A lot of people go into mindset. It kills me sometimes. And I explain why. Because mindset is in the mind. I can't see yours, you can't see mine. So when you have a corporate trainer coming in to talk about, let's change our mind, like, okay, how do you know my mind has changed? You can't see,
Right.
right? If I'm just sitting still there, you don't know whether my values have shifted, right? My perception, my perspective, and all that. But when a person moves differently, oh my God, you go like, what was that about? And they can tell you, because I appreciate the timing, that it's not just about speed, but it's about me slowing down and appreciating that process. And that
Yes.
causes me to change the quality of movement. It's just the same as how I'm speaking with the people I love. Instead of just rushing through, I'm actually contemplating it in my head and then thinking about it before I deliver the message. And as I'm delivering that message, I'm still aware in the presence. Now, then you are embodied, right? Then we know that this person has actually changed that mindset, not just after 10 years, but in that moment, because he has understood something. So change is really in that instant, you know. But if you want to see how this global, transformation, yeah, okay, it can take a bit of time, because culture transform because of, evolution, right? And people and all that, epigenetics and all that. So it's time that we need, but not so much speed, but timing. And I
Mm-hmm.
find that timing is really, understanding where is the window where things are happening, and where's the window when things have happened, you know, and even before it happens, so you can start to see things clearer in its microcosm, and then you can expand out and say, okay, from macro point of view, this is what we are looking at. And I find that this is the constant change of different vantage point that you take, the shift of perspective, that actually changes the perception, and that gives you possibilities. If you don't do
Mm-hmm.
that, then it really doesn't work. So, I was talking about the book that I'm writing, right? Flow, So this whole concept of flow, I talk about the three P's. If the perception wants to be changed, if you want to change somebody's perception, the person has got to see the different perspectives. And once the different perspective is felt and is an experience, not just intellectual understanding, then you can change and create new possibilities, because creation is an active work. And I find the activity, which is the active part, is actually very important in a process. Instead of just, oh, we sit down and we look at the screen and we go like, yeah, I got this, 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that becomes very intellectual, but it disconnect from the top and the bottom, which is the
Right.
brain and
And
the
it's,
body.
I understand in Singapore, there is that like strong intellectual learning from a young age, right? Like I even heard that I was there briefly, actually. Great food, but I was there briefly. People said,
When
"Oh,
were you here, Mark?
I was there. I was like 7 years ago for a coaching job, just for a week. I saw the Grand Prix, which was pretty cool. Ate some good food.
Awesome.
I didn't learn
Okay.
so much about the culture. I was just in and out for a corporate job. But
Okay.
yeah, it was a lot of people wearing glasses, and I said, why are so many people wearing glasses? And someone
Mm.
said, oh, it's because the kids learn to read really young.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this scholastic system where people, it's very competitive, and it's education, like cognitive education, is really encouraged. It's super pushed to memorize, to sit in the
Mm.
classroom, to learn things. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, how does embodiment land within that environment?
I think as of now, as we are speaking, right this moment, there is a beginning in shifting. In Singapore, they call it experiential learning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and then they also have active learning. In Singapore, we have the different departments, and we all want rules and regulations. It's just a bit too much sometimes for my flavor, but it's just my country, right? You gotta love it and embrace it, and embody it, right? And I find that however, because there is just so much lines drawn, people want to follow the line, and hence you could be an experiential learning person, facilitator, or teacher, and then you have active learning, and then you have embodied learning, and then this guy who's Vincent, who's bringing back this whole somatic learning thing, and then what is that all about? So nobody understands the nuances, and that's where I come in and say, well, you got to understand the difference between, embodiment, for example, and active learning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
experiential learning. What are they? And I find that, um, which is why in the current context, it is not as strong and crystallized. Yeah. However, which is where, from a point of view of education, this is where there is actually potential, because
Do you think
yeah.
Singapore will improve embodiment, or other Asian countries? Because there's this weird journey where a lot of the people in the West who are the modern embodiment founders were inspired by Asian art, some African as well, but a lot of Asian inspiration. And then now it's kind of going back. So, for example, a friend of mine is a dance movement therapist in China, in Taiwan,
Mm,
in the
mm,
mainland China too. And he's bringing these Western ideas back, but some of them were originally inspired by Asian ideas. And it also tends to be the pattern that things that get made in the West then get improved in Asia. So it's
mm,
like,
mm.
like what the Japanese did with American industries, for example, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, they tend to outperform the West pretty soon because they bring an efficiency or, a refinement to things. So I'd be really curious, like what's going to happen as these practices go back out there again.
I think I mean, this is my opinion as someone who has lived a little bit in the European countries, and then also in US, and now coming back to Singapore, in this far eastern part of the world, right? And I realized that it is in the marrying, and the cross pollination, right? I mean, the bees are flying around the flowers. Now, same thing, if something that is carried upon a body, right, and it's being brought around to different places, there is a pollination of the work itself, because different people from their different experiences bring forth a new way of thinking, right? If you're speaking to a martial artist, they're going to tell you something about martial arts. And once you apply this model, it takes form in a martial content or an angle, for example. And if you share the Laban work with, a ramen master and say, if you start pulling the dough in this way, it has a different effect because of the air, the absorbance of the air, it gives you the
Ramen
fluffiness.
masters, is that a thing?
Of course, it
There are
is a thing.
that's
Yes, of course. Yeah.
oh wow, that's so cool. They're noodle masters.
Yeah, they're noodle masters.
I
Yes.
love it. I love it.
Yes. So like, in Japan, there are masters who do not allow their students to touch the dough and the noodles, as far as they are concerned. So they start off with washing the pots and pans. It's like going to Shaolin, right? You don't just say, hey, master, I want to learn these special skills you have. Nope, start cleaning the floor. There's a lot of leaves over there, take
Okay.
a broom.
I
Yeah.
know there were sushi masters. I didn't know there were ramen masters too. I guess, but that's kind of something I see in Asia. Is there's masters for everything. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't just make a cup of tea. It's a tea ceremony, right? It's like people can take anything and turn it into this like refined art form, and
Yes.
that's very cool.
Yes. Yes. So I find this whole culinary arts, from street, food, right, hawker food, all the way to fine dining. What's that about, And it's all about that ability to appreciate the tones, right, and the flavors in your tongue. Now, that is also a somatic process, because we have five senses, but once you put the different senses together, oh my God, it's an entire experience. So it's the same thing when we are moving, you know. So if there's fine dining, there must be fine moving. And this is where I find it very important for people to understand that fine dining, is an appreciation of our taste palettes, from the colors that we see, even the ambience that you are experiencing, the music that is played in the background, the cushion that is, behind your back as you are leaning into, that seat of yours, and the cling of the champagne, the glass, that thing that is touching your lip, and how it's touching your lip, how thick is that, china or whatever ware that you are using, right? And it's telltale sign of how much you can appreciate. And
Mhm.
that makes, the cost rise up, exponentially, right? It's because it's bringing you to that experience right in front of you. And that's why it's expensive, right?
Right,
Now,
right.
but
Yeah.
yeah, and this is where I feel fine moving should also be parallel of people actually value the fact that, oh, I got a knee pain, I can't bend down anymore. Now, how much is that going to cost? People
Uh-huh.
don't think of it like this,
Yeah.
right? They just take it for granted. I'm just going to exercise myself. I'm just going to, sacrifice the pain and pick up this thing, and not knowing that there's actually a better way to move, so that, your joints don't get locked up, or, your sciatic nerves don't flare because of your muscular, pinching of the nerves, right? So it's all about giving that space that I feel is very important. And giving space is something that sometimes we don't know, because we want everything fast, we
It's a
don't give
fast life. Singapore's a fast life. London's fast. New York, everywhere really now. It's
everywhere.
that sort of like crazy Asian city vibe is spread everywhere.
Yep,
Like
yep.
New York, Hong Kong, Singapore. These are all fast, intense cities, and as you say, they can. It's possible to lose space within that. And it's
Hmm.
like, how do we keep that space when we're surrounded by people, when life's really fast? We've got a million things to do. Like, what are your top tips for like keeping space in that kind of environment?
And okay, so this brings me back to, what I was saying earlier just now about timing, right? It's not so much about speed, but timing, which is like dance and coordination. You got to listen to the music and be synchronous with it, right? Which we call musicality. Now, when it comes to, how fast we scroll Instagram, for example, how fast we're going to scroll our Facebooks and all that, what if, I'm just saying, what if you take one more second
Hmm.
before you scroll? What
One breath,
if,
right? One breath.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. And through practice, and you keep doing it, it becomes a new pattern that you are actually embodying, because it is in the habits, that creates our destiny, isn't it? So if we are going to change our destiny, I think it's the first thing is change your breathing, change the way you do something, right? If you can slow it down a notch, if you can just allow that person to come in, I mean, the funny thing when I was living in New York was this: a lot of people like to ask, "Hey, how are you?" But they don't wait for an answer and they left.
yes.
And I'm like, what the hell is this?
Hey,
You
how
know?
are you? And then they move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and and
It's
and
surreal.
then I realized that culturally, how are you is not meant to ask you how you really are.
Just hello.
It's just hello. So they don't really want to know how you are. So then why don't just say hello and move on?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's then we are talking about the congruence of how we think versus how we speak and how we connect. And that comes from your ability to align your thoughts, your words, and your deed, isn't it? Because
Nice.
if we are not aligned, then we are not congruent, and then we'll keep repeating the things, and it becomes a social norm because everyone is saying hello, how are you, and then they are going. I'm like, what the hell is that? I would
Yeah,
rather
in
you.
some countries you ask hello, how are you, and people give you an in-depth story about their life as well. That's
Yeah.
sometimes you hear
Yeah.
you listening to someone's problems about their grandmother for half an hour. So yeah, different cultural patterns for sure. And what are you doing day to day, Vincent? Give me a sense of what your days look like. Like, how are you applying this work?
So, well, I think, okay, this is something that is new actually. Recently I've adopted this whole process, like I say, timing, right, and slowing things down. I used to wake up, and the first thing is I reach for the phone. I gotta know what's happening,
Yes.
right? No one is spared. And I've given myself the liberty, instead of giving myself the prison sentence of not being able to touch my phone, but I have the liberty now to read a book or
Okay,
to do
that's nice.
something different other than touching the phone.
So I just want to call people to that framing. So it's not like a hard rule, like I'm not allowed to touch my
Nope.
phone, but it's
Yep.
like, hey, I'm free to do it or not. Like I pulled out my phone this morning. My alarm went off on my phone. It's so easy when you've got no willpower in the morning because your alarm's just gone off and you haven't yet gained the consciousness to sort of control habits. And I was like, I found myself checking how many signups there were for the Embodiment conference, and I was like, I haven't even got out of bed. And I'm like, you know what, Mark? Do that after coffee. It doesn't really matter if there's 330,000 or 331,000 right now. It's fine, So like and that sets the whole day as well, doesn't it? Like that little bit of that pattern
Yes.
we set for the whole day.
Yes. And I also realized, I mean, through all the different readings and meeting different people, right? The space and time before we sleep and the space and time after we wake up, that whole process is very important because it decides how we are going to live in that day. Now,
So
if
say
we are
that
not,
again. Say that again.
so that space right
Yeah.
before we sleep and that space right after we wake up are very important time. So these are where the theta state, right? And we if we are not really going into a process with understanding, if science has already been there, teaching us about things, then I think, okay, we have the knowledge, we have the info. Then the question next is, do you want to make it a practice? Right?
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
invitation.
Yeah.
It's not an imprisonment. A lot of people feel like, oh, you mean what? I can't smoke now, and then I'm gonna suffer. I'm like, no, you can do whatever you want.
Practice as opportunity, practice as inspiration, practice as
Yes,
possibility, right? Rather than
yes.
practice as tyranny.
So I say this, if a person, for example, a client that says I've got pain, I say, so how often do you have pain within that 1 hour? Say, well, I kind of can't sit still for at least a good 20 minutes. So I say, can you open the window of joy and pleasantry in that 20 minutes? So let's talk about learning new things so that you cut the 20 minutes down to 19 to 18 to 17 to 16. And before you know it, for that 1 hour, you don't even have that 20 minutes of pain. So
Mhm.
it is having that ability to invite, yourself to go on a different tangent so that you can actually open up window of joy, of well-being. And I find this is really interesting because most people are just thinking about the pain. So we have this word problem solving, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's actually solutions providing, which I find more interesting. Because when you are solution providing, what it means is you already have an arsenal of solutions right behind you, rather than looking at the problem and solving the problem. But when you are solutions providing, what's happening here is all you need to do is find that particular tool that the other person is needing, and you just give it to him, and that's it. It's appropriate to him or for or her. So it's not something that you prescribe like an authoritarian, right? I say this and hence you got to do this. And then they feel like, oh my God, if I don't do this, I feel inadequate. And then, all these emotional mental health issues that's coming up again because somebody just gave me quote unquote a prescription, whether it is something I have to do or a medicine I have to take. And if I don't do it, my God, there all these stresses and anxiety. Don't we have that enough already in our society that is so fast paced?
And also, do we really want to take on, it's so easy to take on medical models of like diagnosis and cure and things like that. It's so easy to take those on unconsciously because it's just a framework we grew up with,
Yep, yep. And that's where we need to invite new ways of thinking, right? New ways of moving. And because most of the time, if you want to, there's this thing, right? How do you eat an elephant? Not just one mouthful. You take it a bite at a time. So that's what the ants are doing, right? When the elephant dies and decomposes, the bigger animals comes, and the nature is always feeding itself very nicely. The problem is we don't learn from nature. We want everything fast. And our sense of being nurtured is, let's do it faster. Can you do it more? Can you do it bigger? Can you, cover more space, eat up the space?
Faster, stronger, more. It's like the Olympic motto, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And then, and it's all about the time, the speed rather than the timing. And I find that if we are able to actually, slow down a little bit and open up that window to actually let more data come in, it's kind of like what our pupils are doing it every day, isn't it? When there's too much light, it closes, right? And when there is not enough light, it opens up. Now, same thing with love, right? If you love somebody, your pupils naturally opens up and dilates. So then the question is, do you want to fall in love every single day or not? you know and falling in love with the information, with that wisdom that is happening around you every single day becomes a practice. Then you know what you are opening up to, and not just saying, oh, we got to be open, but then you're not practicing openness. Openness is when your child want to share something with you, instead of saying, you don't know enough, you got to learn this, you got to learn that. Maybe you can say, this is interesting. Why do you think this way? Can you explain to daddy? That's one way. And then maybe with your partner, with your working colleagues and all that, if you actually ask, hey, hello, how are you doing today? Actually stop there, and if they were to tell you their life stories, you also have the power after 5 minutes to say, darling, I really want to listen to you, but I do have to get somewhere. But because you have extended 5 minutes of your goodwill to him or her, it would change their lives too. And I'm quite sure it's going to bounce back into the universe, create a dent, and then come back to you. If it's not direct, it will be indirect. So
Yeah.
I say this, we've been kids before, right? We play in these big tubs, and every time when we are in a pool or in a tub, we tap the water and there's this ripples that goes back, that goes out of us. So I find that when the ripples don't come back, a lot of people have an issue with that. It's because they don't wait for the secondary waves to come back so that we can receive it. Most people are so eager, right, after they expect something, to receive something almost like this. It cannot work like this because the universe is a very big space. If we want to help more people, then we must be able to know that the further we want to reach, the longer it would take to come back.
Got it. Okay, Vincent. Wow, you can talk, man. You sure you're not Irish like me? You can really talk. I love it. I think this is like a fast track poetry of embodiment. Like, who are you working with day to day? What kind of people?
I work with business owners. I work with families, parents. I work with therapists. I work with people who are leaders in the organization.
It's pretty broad,
Yeah,
huh?
and quite broad, pretty broad.
You have
Yes.
a specialism? I mean, I know you've mentioned pain, but I mean, it sounds like you go quite a range. Is there a particular thing you're specialist at?
Currently, my area of focus that I'm going into is to decipher patterns. Right? I tell people why they have quote unquote pain, for example. And if pain is not just a physical pain, right? Because it's somatic work. So then, it's something that is flared up from over years of being afraid of something, and then you are pinching your lower back, or you are protecting yourself. This whole process is, when people are, for example, self-soothing themselves, it tells you a little bit about how they are moving. And I find that in our society, as we share that, it brings a lot of wisdom back into our bodies as well. Because if we are practitioners, right, instead of calling yourself an expert, I think as we practice, we see that, wow, this person is suffering so much. If only I could help. So there was this thing that I was sharing with one of my students. I said, if I see someone that has, fallen down and injured himself, I could almost, it's like empathetic, right? You feel that pain. But what if when we feel that pain and we create healing with us, can we send this energy back to that person? So almost instantly that person might feel, healed. So it is a, I don't know, a hypothesis, and I find that if this thing can be taught, then we are able to open up ourselves, right, to receive more information that will let each and every cell, inside of us say, hey, you know what? I think it's okay. I think we don't have to tighten here. I think we can just breathe a little bit. Hey, I think we can make friends with the cells on the right side so that I don't have this, knot in us. I don't need this impingement. Now I can say to, the sciatic nerve and say, hey, buddy, I think you can let go. We are cool here. It's kind of like all these American movies, right? You have the FBI coming in, and then the local police would say, okay, it's not your jurisdiction. You can't do this anymore. We are FBI, we're taking over, and if you're like NSA and all that, I find this whole movie thing is
Yeah.
actually happening in us. We are that movie.
What do you mean?
Because if we are able, right, to actually see that our brain, is such a powerful tool, right? But what is feeding this brain? All throughout our lives, our brain is fed with our movement, our experiences. A breakup, a bang on the head when you're a baby, you walked and you fell down, and then you play football and maybe you sprain your ankle. All those things combined makes you who you are, and it is from those things that we draw our experiences. It's like a summary of it. Do we then get the most positive out of that experience? Do we feel happy having a breakup or not? you know and if you have like 6 breakups, and you go like, whoa, this is happening a little too much, then what are we doing? And if we have the capacity to allow that to come into our lives, and every part of ourselves are talking to one another, we actually open up this whole wisdom. You call it body wisdom, call it brain wisdom, call it brain body wisdom, whatever title you want to call it. I find this is where practitioners around the world needs to understand. And it's not so much naming something that is, the nomenclature of it. It's not so much the importance of naming something, but understanding that they're all the same, so that we have lesser of this fight, this political, this is my thing and this is not your thing. And
Well,
but I find that
Vincent, I'm going to interrupt. You've done quite a lot of travel, Holland and the US and obviously Singapore. And we're also talking before we press record about, the conference bringing people together, different fields. Not everybody knows what Laban is, and that's kind of a pity. Now we're in this international age where, like, because I feel like, me and you are similar age, similar interests. It's like, but we got, different mums. It's like, it's my brother in Embodiment from Singapore. Cool. So people are connecting across the world. The barriers are breaking down. Like the yoga people are learning about trauma. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, right? Like we've got people in, across the world talking to each other. Now, there's always been, foreigners at the Shaolin Temple, right? But now it's like never before because of the technology. And what do you think is going to happen with all this kind of like breaking down of the barriers, both between the disciplines and between the cultures?
Well, when it comes to discipline, I think definitely we can learn to adopt more things from one another, right? How you start a class, for example, right? It's like how do you do your warm up? Is it just the traditional pliés and tendus, and in the dance class, for example, or when you go to a Aikido class, you're shaking your hands and kicking and just very gently tapping, or if you're in a Taekwondo class or in a soccer club. And I find when we are able to come to the most simplest, right? And I find that simple is actually not simple at all, because simple for different people means different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But simpler is comparative.
Mm-hmm.
So then we ourselves as practitioner, we need to find what is simpler, and simpler and simpler and simpler. You know, we keep distilling. And as we progress into that stage, we can actually craft out something that is very valuable for our students and the people who, you know, are following the work, you know, and we become the predecessors of who they are, just like we have our own predecessors, right? And I find it is through this process that we can actually learn to improve techniques, for example. So that is through that discipline. And in terms of the culture, then, you know, culture is shaped over a long time, you know. And I find that if we are able to craft something from ourselves, from our thinking and practice, as we share to our own community, and as the community expands, just like what you're doing right now with this whole global community, is that as we move forward 10, 15, 20, 200 years, right? And even when we are no longer around, I think that this whole possibilities, and who knows, maybe we will continue to be around because of recordings like this, right? And when it's being played to, you know, the newer generations, is that, hey, I didn't know that this thing was already happening 200 years ago. How
Wow,
come,
this
you
is,
know?
we rediscover, right? Like,
Yeah.
and imagine if you could rediscover like old Tai Chi masters or, you know, whatever. It's all there. And I wonder if this recording of technology will mean that things aren't lost in the same way, or is it just up to every generation to sort of reinvent the wheel? Sometimes it's just young people have to do that. So yeah, I'm curious because we haven't had this much recorded before. Like in the
Mm,
Middle Ages in Europe, a book was very valuable because it had to be made by hand. It took a
yeah.
guy a month to write a Bible or a book, you know? And it's like, so if you owned a book, that was like, you were a rich guy. And a library was made, if you had 100 books like this behind me, this
Oh
would be
my
like, you're
God,
a
that's like,
super
yeah.
rich guy. Whereas now I can go on Amazon, order. I don't even have to order, you know, a physical book. If I can't get it delivered, I can have it, you know, electronically sent to me. I've got 500 podcasts just on my phone I could listen to. I never get around to, you know, I'm like, I swear I've got more books than I can possibly read in my life probably already. You know, like
Mhm,
if I didn't
mhm.
buy any more books, I could do with everything I have now. So this
Yeah.
is kind of a new situation of overload. And I like, you know, with the conference we've tried to do filtering and we've given some ways to find what you need and some cheat notes and, you know, it feels like curating is the big challenge now rather than just providing information. You know what I mean?
Yes, you are totally right on that. And I think because we are in the info technology, you know, and age, right, where it is just information overload. And I find that the next thing is learning how to sieve through the information to
It's
bring you
true.
what
Yeah.
you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, again, like the back to this whole ramen thing, I don't know why it's in my brain, you know, for
You're
whatever
making me
reason.
hungry, man. I didn't have breakfast. I'm ramen.
You
I'm
know,
gonna have to
yeah,
have noodles for lunch. I know I am now.
you know, the
Come
sieve
back
that,
to
you
ramen.
know, the Chinese masters who are doing ramen are also doing, right? It's this powder, right? This flour and all that, you know, you want to get the finest ingredients into your food. And I find that through sieving is also allowing us to understand what are the rough, what are the raw, and what are the fine, you know. And the refinement of this process is really in understanding that, you know, different, if you think of it from the smallest, the grain, imagine your one grain of that flour that is being sieved through that hole. It's like, wee, I got to the next level, and wee, I got to the next level, and eventually you land with the people of your same kind, right? Now to me, it's not so much a good, a bad thing, it's just what you need. If you are a small particle and
Yeah.
you mix around with small particles, then you feel at home, isn't it? So if you are the rougher, rawer ones, you know, and you are the raw ones, then you stay with the raw ones, which is, you know, how
And
we mine gold to begin with, isn't it?
the
Right.
internet does allow for this hyper niching as well. You know, like at the conference, someone's doing a session on climbing and yoga. So it's quite specialist. But there'll
Mm,
be 200 people at that session who are interested in climbing and yoga. They can make their own Facebook group after that session. You
yep.
know,
Yep.
like
Yep.
there is this hyper specialization possible, and you know, like your tribe is not the people who look like you anymore, right?
Yeah.
My tribe is you. You're my
Mm,
tribe. You know,
mm,
you might be in Singapore, you might have different genetics, different look about you, whatever, but we're in the same tribe. And I
mm-hmm.
think that's real interesting now that your tribe is no longer where you're born, your nation, even your religion. It's a different like values and interests now, isn't it? It's kind of that's changed from 100 years ago where it was like, well, Britain versus France versus Germany. You know, it's just geographical. Now it's changed.
Yeah, and I find this is really cool because that was the question I was thinking, you know, and I was toying with when I was in New York. I was asking one of my teacher's husband, and she was one of these early nutritionist scientists, right? And I was saying, do you think I should be basing myself here in New York, or should I go back home and base myself back in Singapore? And he didn't answer me immediately. He just looked at me and said, it's a very interesting question, you know, and the fact that we have internet, it really doesn't really matter where you are based, isn't it? Because, you know, you can be somewhere else almost instantly if you have internet. And I mean, coming from somebody who is in his 80s, you know, I mean, it's like, what, you know, and it's really, I would say, you know, that internet is actually, like you say, breaking a lot of barriers, breaking new grounds, in fact. However, I also believe that nothing is as good as when we can meet. Can you imagine if
Yeah.
200 over people, you know, in a conference? I tell you, it will be really, it's out of the world, you know. And if you have 500,000 people attending, you know, in the embodiment conference, it's like, and we can see one another, and it's just a month long, you know,
Okay,
not
after COVID, I'm gonna book Wembley Stadium from. Oh no,
yeah.
this is gonna be my next idea. I hate it when I have ideas. I'm gonna book Wembley Stadium for a month, like the whole world to come to London.
Is Liverpool gonna be there?
You're a Liverpool fan. You're a Liverpool fan. My
I
father
used to, yeah, I used to play football a little bit, and Liverpool, you know, back in the Yen
That's
Rush
where I was
days, John
born. My
Barnes.
family are
Yes.
Liverpool fans. There's a lot of Irish
Oh
in.
my.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we did well this year. My sister's very happy. Listen, I'm going to call this one ramen somatics, if you don't mind. So I hope that nobody thinks that's racist or something, but it's kind of a fun theme. You've definitely made me hungry. We need to wrap up though, because I've got a million things to do. But this is fun. If you're ever in England, look me up, and if I'm in Singapore, then let's go for noodles for sure. And Singapore
Definitely.
has great food. If anyone out there has not been to Singapore, it's some of the best food I've ever had, and great for vegetarians too. So, okay, final message, Vincent, about the body and where do people find you? So those two things, where do people find you and final message?
They can find me on Instagram. You know, I think that's fastest because anywhere on this planet, if you just go to Danspire VYDANSPIRE you would see me on Instagram, right? Or danspire.com, you will find me.
Danspire, DAN for November, Spire, like the other church.com, danspire.com.
Yeah. Is there a church called Spire?
No, Spire is the like the tall part of
Yeah.
the church. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, it came from the word inspire. I wanted to inspire the world, you know, when I was a little younger, and I realized that the inspiration is actually is a two-way street. If we are not inspired, we can't inspire.
Absolutely, that's a big
Yeah.
part of leadership and teaching is keeping inspired. Like as a like for me, that's not just something that people get inspired like accidentally. I'm like, no. You need to ensure. Well, you can't ensure it. You can maximize the chance of it happening accidentally. You can make yourself accident prone. You know, that's how I look at inspiration. If I don't do that as a leader, I'm screwed. So super important.
Yeah, so this really ties in with what I was saying earlier on about opening that window up. You know, if we open that window up, you know, we are constantly allowing ourselves, you know, more things to come into our lives. So yeah, it's been great fun, you know, chatting with you, Mark. It's like, whoa.
It's fun, man. It's fun.
Yeah.
Vincent, I've enjoyed this a lot. Thank you so much for joining us today.